Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. There's
Good
a
morning.
long pause for me. We're happy to see everybody. Um, as always, if you are hearing this and you want to put something in the chat, then that would be great. So that we know that you can hear us okay. We hope everyone's doing well. I'll actually start us off in the chat. Good morning. And of course, my family's been texting me all morning. I'm like, don't text at 9 o'clock. We'll see. If you hear a lot of dinging, hopefully you won't hear that.
Like the one time it can be dead silent, and then the one time you need it to be.
I know, it's funny.
Mhm.
Well, I'm glad that everybody's joining. I think just want to make sure everybody can hear us. Good morning. Yay. Okay. Thank you, ST. Don't know who you are because you've masked yourself, but we're so glad that you said good morning so that we know that everybody can hear us. It's only 8:58, so we're going to wait for a couple minutes, drink our coffee. Everybody needs a couple of minutes. Everybody needs a couple of minutes of peace during the holiday season because everything's just rushing so much. So we're glad to give that to you. It's like when I go to the dentist office and they're like, "Well, we're sorry to keep." I'm like, "Please, just keep me waiting with magazines and hot coffee while I'm waiting." Good morning, Jen. It's so good to see you. Good morning, Erica. So happy to see you, Rachel. A lot of names, or Rochelle, sorry. A lot of names that we know and people that we know. So we're happy that you're here for this presentation. Oh, sorry, Jen, to hear you're homesick.
Oh no.
That's never good. I hope that the sickness is over before all of the important things start, like your time with your family. We were just saying that we were going to give it a couple more minutes because we know that everyone kind of logs in right at 9. So we're very excited about the presentation today. We actually we're at 2 schools this last week, and it's always great to be out there.
Good to be home. To get out.
Yeah, it's also good to be home because then we get the immediate feedback from the parents that we know that what we're saying is actually hitting home. So feel free to use the comment box today.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. It's 9 o'clock. Just going to wait a few more seconds as people trickle in. It's crazy because always get so many people to sign up, and I think they want to watch the replay. So we had, I think, almost 200 people registered for this morning. As always, it's just that crazy time of year. All right. So I guess I will go ahead and kick us off since it's 9 o'clock, and we're super happy that everybody is here, And my name is Debbie Rosen. This is Lindsay Toms, at least to my left. I don't know if it works that way everywhere that people can see. And she's actually the other co-owner of the StudyPro, but we decided that it would be better for one of us to do the presentation from home so that there's not any chance of echoing. So as we mentioned, we give this presentation amongst others at schools and some similar types of things when we work with faculty at a number of the local area schools. And so we're very excited about sharing this today. I think it's that time of year that people need a lot of strategies. And if you don't know who we are an executive function and study skills center. And of course, that means that all of this is dear to our heart. And we created this presentation based on all the experience that we've had working with just thousands of students over the last 8 years. We're happy to share with you today um, what we hope will be a very practical presentation and one that will really be thought provoking. And so we're also happy to take any questions that you have. The presentation will be recorded. I'll say that a couple of times because I seem to always get that question. So if you were like, wow, I'm loving it, and I want to share this with my spouse or friends or whatever, we will record this. We'll start by sharing that if you look at what predicts how well children will do later in school, more and more evidence is showing that executive functions, working memory, and inhibition actually predict success better than IQ tests. And you may say, well, wait, what's the relationship between IQ and executive function? And we're going to talk through that. But in short, the relationship between IQ and executive functions is that they're different things. So your IQ, of course, you're born with, and there's a gift that you're given at the beginning of your life, and can, of course, there's neuroplasticity, so we can become smarter all the time. But what we know is that when we struggle with initiation, inhibition, emotional control, other executive functions, planning and organization, that regardless of how smart we are, we may struggle with school. Because if we wait to the last minute to do that paper, or even if we have test anxiety, or we forget to turn something in, even though we did it, that can actually have a great effect on the grades that we get, and it can have a great effect on our psyche. It can have a great effect on relationships with families. So those are the types of things that are critical for us to remember throughout the presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay to talk a little bit what that might look like in your student or other students that you might be working with.
Of course. Yeah, I'm going to introduce you to these hypothetical students here, but I'm sure they will look pretty familiar to you. So I want to see if anybody in the chat knows an Ethan. And Ethan might have been really capable of showing all of his signs of intelligence in elementary school, in middle school, and then you might have started to see or notice things they were doing well until there was a transition time. They might be struggling on getting work done, but it's really seen at home. You might see them staying up late. You might see them working at the last minute. You might see them show some perfectionistic tendencies. So it might be getting the work done, but at what toll and at what cost. And there might be resistance to getting some help. So I'm curious if anybody knows an Ethan, if they might have seen it in their own students and their kids. And if not, there's also another student I wanted to introduce you to, Nora here. Nora might have challenges with attentional issues that might be seen in class a lot. You might get comments home from teachers. You might see it as a parent, meaning that they rush through their work. So you see kind of careless errors is what the comments are often described as. They might have some pretty low frustration. So they might hit a barrier, hit a wall, miss a point, and they become easily overwhelmed. And then, my favorite, and what's a favorite of many parents who are trying to support a kid like Nora, who you see that the prioritization means it looks like they're giving all their time and attention to pretty low value, low importance stuff. So you might see them coloring the worksheet before actually doing the math problems on the worksheet. And it can be incredibly frustrating for those of us who are trying to help, because you know what will be the most use of their effort, which will get them the most fruits from their effort, but they're prioritizing the thing that is fun or easier for them to do. So what these students have in common is, not surprisingly, what our theme of our talk today is about: executive functions. And Debbie's going to describe it a little bit more here.
So we often get asked if there's a challenge that would be addressed by a tutor, or if there's a challenge that should be addressed with executive function coaching, or it's just an executive function challenge. And I think what the first clue is that we look at is, are these challenges across classes? So there may be some preferred class that we don't have as much challenge getting our math and science done, or we don't have as much challenge getting our English and history done, but we really struggle with the others. So if we think about the tutoring helping with content, so if I really struggle with math or history or a foreign language, I might need a tutor. But if I'm struggling with assignments in general, or getting assignments in, or understanding how to plan and manage them, then we know that's an executive function. So just like a lot of quote unquote diagnoses, we often look at if it's above and beyond a normal school process. So it's not that, of course, every student might have a challenge with they're getting their homework in sometimes, but it's really something that's more pervasive. And a lot of times we see this as they just don't care, or they should just be able to do this. And shouldn't just are words that we listen for because we know that that means there most likely is a missing skill. And the other two bullets here really are referring to the fact that parents try very hard to help. It's just hopefully throughout this presentation, we can give you a little bit more effective ways to help, because what we know is that it's often that the kids know what to do. It's really getting them into the work and helping them start the work that's the most challenging.
Yeah. So these executive functions that we're going to keep referred to, you see here on your screen here, and you see it at the bottom of the pyramid here, because executive functions are your ability to set a goal and achieve a goal. So it starts with these core set of 8 skills. So it's not often that we don't have the goal. And that's what Debbie was describing. So sometimes when we see the behaviors in school, we might assume that it's because they don't have the same goals as us. So the goal is to get the homework done, do well in school. Believe it or not, the goal is to pay attention. However, you need all of these skills that you see here on your screen to achieve that goal. So I know January 1st is coming up, and I know there's some people who might be in this chat who are the ones that can get their taxes done that first day of January 1st. However, there might be some of us who don't, and we need some of these strategies and skills. So what you see here next is the study skills. I know that to do and get a goal met, you might need time management skills. Now, I can have a planner, I can have a calendar, I can have all that, but I also need to be able to initiate during that time. Or I need to manage my emotions, my frustrations of the day in order to initiate, in order to use that hour block that I have blocked out to do my taxes. So these study skills are what are the core skills that the students need every day in school. They need to know how to receive information the best way possible, take notes. So oftentimes if you're seeing these struggles in school, it's because of these skills, either the executive functions or the study skills, or oftentimes in conjunction with both. And that's where you might see the barriers and why the actions aren't happening. It's not that they don't have the same goal as us, or they don't want to have the same achievement as we know that they can achieve. It's often that they need strategies in these areas. So there might be a little bit of a delay here that I'm seeing. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes. Okay, perfect. So then that's what our goal is to give them the skills and the set of skills that can lead to that success in school. So oftentimes where parents are supporting is on homework, and how that looks like is we know that it can be a very important part of their development to get their homework done. And we see them being very capable of doing it, but we might see the struggles on why they're maybe not showing that resilience and able to get that goal met when it's time to do their work.
Okay, well, I'm not sure if it was my garbling or your garbling, Lindsay, but I think just to summarize what you were saying was that the study skills, which are often what parents are asking, hey, can we ensure that my student has time management, note taking, growth mindset, test taking skills, self-advocacy, but they really are relying on the underlying executive function skills. So that's really why all of these are so critical, and investing in helping our students build those executive function skills are really the base of the pyramid and what we're trying to do and talk about here today. So that gives you a little bit of an introduction to what we're going to do. And that's hopefully what we'll learn is already thinking about this as a paradigm shift, that it's not about really just getting great at homework. It's not really just about getting them to do the homework, but it's really understanding that if something isn't getting done that we want to get done, because we do believe that they want to be successful, it's about ensuring that we see what that barrier is. So that's really the main message we're trying to get across today, is that when there's a barrier in the goals that we see, and we know that that the students share, that there should be a strategy. And so everything we're really going to talk about today is about how can we boost those strategies by the parents first recognizing that A, they want to be successful, and B, that there is a barrier, and helping to maybe have a better view of what those barriers might be. Um, and then how can we talk to our students to help overcome some of these barriers versus maybe just asking, hey, have you started your homework, or don't you have homework to do? Um, okay, so with that, if you do have any questions in between all of this, please feel free to put them in the chat. We, happy to try to take them as they come up. So we hear a lot about homework, and as I said, we're not really focusing. Our job here at the StudyPro isn't focusing on helping kids to do their homework better, and here's why. Because at the end of the day, when they graduate from high school, from college, from beyond college, if they're going to a master's or other graduate program, our goal isn't to get them to be great at homework. Our goal is to help them be good at things that are difficult, to overcome challenges, to be able to persist and thrive despite challenges and setbacks. And so that's really what we call building academic resilience. And of course, you can already tell that academic resilience requires executive functions like initiation, inhibition, et cetera. And so we may ask ourselves, well, why aren't our kids just doing their homework? Why? They should be just easy. I actually had a parent the other day tell me it's just common sense. It's so easy just to be able to come home and know what you have to do and do it. Well, it's really actually quite challenging. And as we've been saying this whole morning already, that behavior really never happens without a reason. So we have to be more detectives in terms of understanding what are the barriers, even if it should be easy, that are between us and our students getting their homework done. Number two is that, homework is just flat out hard. Kids come home, their executive function tanks are low, they have to get started on their work, and it's a painful thing. It's the epitome of a non-preferred activity. I'm sure you guys don't want to come home and do a big project after you've worked all day. And our kids' brains are not fully developed. There is a great webinar that was on our YouTube page from a previous webinar that we've done. And basically what it talks about is the teen brain and the developing teen brain. And right now their emotional brain is much more developed than their prefrontal cortex, where that's how they manage two goals. That's the piece of executive function that Lindsay was talking about. So what is that saying is that, to be honest, just like a young child, that the reward center and getting that hit of dopamine and knowing that you have that reward is really what's required to get started on work. And what we think is rewards is like, oh, if you do great in this class or this homework thing, you'll do great in this class, and you'll do great in your middle school, and you'll get into a great high school, or you'll do great in your high school and you get into a great college. So we see all of that connection, but the kids really aren't seeing that connection. And so one of the things we'll talk about as we go forward is ways to bring the finish line closer for them so that they see more of those rewards, and it doesn't seem like it's so hard to get the work done. So this is why it's hard to build academic resilience for students, because right now they're not as motivated to do super hard things, and at least for non-preferred activities. So as we said, building academic resilience isn't really about getting them to do their homework. It's about helping them build the tolerance to push through things that are hard. So Lindsay will help us look at what that looks like in real life and some real examples.
Yeah, so I might be in my home right now, but I can kind of put myself in your homes, and I can imagine that if it is time to do homework, and this Debbie's point is well received, that it's not just about homework, but it is about pushing through things that are hard. But I'm sure we can all relate to this work is boring. Have we all thought that, like, I do not want to do this. I just don't want to do this. Now, this is what the experience is like for your kids right now, because their frontal lobes are developing. The barriers, the work is boring. Okay, so now what? Now my brain and my natural tendency is going to be drawn to do something fun. Yeah, I want to do something fun. I want to go on TikTok. I want to chat with my friends. I want to watch a YouTube video. And the challenge that happens there is then that is going to hardwire their brain with the dopamine from doing the something fun. And that, unfortunately, then reinforces the avoidance of the boring thing. It reinforces that relief of avoiding. We can all feel that wave of dopamine that we get when we tell ourselves, oh, I'll do that later. If you can relate to that, I know I can. When we tell ourselves, I'll do it later, we get a sense of relief. So what we want to do is try to interrupt this pattern in a really healthy way to help them notice that when interest or urgency isn't there, when the work is boring, it's because usually it's not interesting or there's not really prioritization that helps me initiate it. So that means the urgency. When it is due last minute, this is why you can see them kick in and they can focus and they don't even reach for the tablet or their phone when it's due the next day. That's because they're provided with urgency. So those things is when we can recognize it, then we can create it for ourselves. You probably don't even realize you might do it every day. So what this interruption looks like, I can catch myself now and say, this work is boring. Okay, but I might need an initiation strategy. So if they have that thought, then they can change it. So I can use an initiation strategy. And what some of those are going to look like is pairing a non-preferred activity like homework, doing your taxes, with something that is preferred. And I know I'm doing it, but on the next page, we got some other inspiration here. It's things that produce dopamine. It's the anticipation of a reward, things that bring you a little bit of joy in your day. And you see some examples of here on the screen, and grab your favorite drink. I'm not bribing myself to do my work today, but I am rewarding myself a little bit. I am pairing something that I prefer, my coffee, start the day, to my initiation, starting my work. So this is the awareness that we want to start building with our students. So we have a couple other ideas here that might be a little bit novel to them or to you. Music is a great dopamine producer. Sometimes we set alarms, but then the alarm just goes on snooze and snooze and snooze. You're less likely to snooze a playlist that you really like. So think about setting up, like if you have a smart home device, Alexa or Google Home, or there's a little hackier way to do it with your phone, but you can set up routines that it would start playing a playlist at a certain time. So that's a natural cue. I think we've all experienced the wake up to an alarm and we just, we don't want the reaction from our students. We want the, this is something pleasant. This is a dopamine producing playlist that I curated, I love. So when the work is feeling overwhelming, this can create some novelty and interest that makes the initiation, the start routine, a little bit easier for them. So that's one thing. Another thing could be highlighters, checklists. I know that this is a fan favorite of a lot of our students is, okay, editing this paper is overwhelming, but I like highlighters. So I'm going to prepare and pair this non-preferred task of editing my paper with the highlighters. I'm going to go through first and I'm going to find out all my grammar mistakes and I'm going to highlight those with blue. So it's a little bit more interesting than just the cold start of I got to edit my paper. Another thing that produces some novelty, the highlighters, a way we could do this is in Google Docs. So if it feels boring, I want you to see on your screen, you're going to see this little GIF kind of change the background color of this Google Doc. This is just a built-in feature of Docs. If you go to File, Page Setup, and then Background Page Color, you can choose whatever color you want. But you might notice even yourself seeing that stark black and white colonial times assignment on your screen. When that changes to that pastel blue, it just looks a bit novel or different. This is the same science and technology that slot machines are using to keep us engaged and interesting in playing a slot. It's just, I'm going to give your brain something new to focus on. And by changing the color, all of a sudden it becomes much, much easier to start. So this is a great one that just, no, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say at our last school presentation, one of the moms who was a lawyer said, oh my gosh, I need to do that because I can never get myself to start when I have to read a really long contract. So.
Right. Right. And this is a good relevant question. What about when your kiddo discovers this and doesn't get back to work? Now, what I will notice is that if we are patient, like choosing the background color, they'll lose the novelty of like the choice pretty quickly. So if we're kind of patient and we just think of like that, this is the awareness. And if we can interrupt with the question of like, oh, what do you notice? What do you notice that this color is? Pastel or fluorescence? Let's pick a fluorescent. Then I kind of give them a choice of two, like, okay, let's pick one and then let's get started. What we don't want to do is just give them like another distraction tool. But what I will tell you, and every single time that I've used this with the kid, I haven't seen them use it as a distraction tool when they're introduced to it as an initiation strategy. Just be like, I'm not trying to convince them to like the colonial times assignment. I'm not trying to even get them I think the massacre in Boston is a fascinating part of history. That was really fun, but I'm not going to try to convince them to like it. But when I'm saying, okay, but I'm noticing you're having trouble getting started, let me show you this cool trick. And I want to see what you notice about your brain. Let's see. And then they usually say, oh yeah, that's much easier. then that transition, they're kind of on-ramped into that assignment, but that's a good question. And then we have one more here that we want to talk about is how to show them what the finish line actually is. Most of the time, what the biggest barrier to starting is thinking that it's going to take forever. So these are part of natural routines that we do every day at the StudyPro of like previewing and estimating. So every time that they're making a plan for their homework, they're actually previewing it to get an idea so their brain can't assume it's going to take forever. We do set timers. We make plans to take breaks. We also might just chunk down the goal. And all of this, what helps it do is produces the dopamine of being done. So they can actually visualize what done looks like. I know I'm having a real big challenge of Christmas gifts because right now I know that I can't visualize what done looks like yet, but I know I could use one of these strategies that could help me visualize it. Why do we create checklists? It's because it's able to offload and it can make us see what actually the finish line looks like. So how that might look like on your homework, and not with Christmas gifts. This is one could be for any age, but this is basically when it's overwhelming, when there's a lot of visual overwhelm on a worksheet page, you just take a folder, manila folder, cut it in thirds, and then just chunk it up. This is the equivalent of doing the first 5 problems. But what if they only saw the first 5 problems? What if I'm not convincing them like, oh, just try the first 5 problems. I bet it won't take too long. They're going to be like, oh, it's going to take forever. What if I showed them what 5 problems actually look like? This is what it could be. The equivalent for older students even is on a doc is to zoom in and just see the first 5 problems. Now, and then this one is on a whiteboard. So I'm not feeling the motivation. I want to give some novelty. I want them to see the finish line. This was for a student who needed to check over their work. So we wrote the problems all kind of chaotically on the whiteboard in a different order. And then as she checked over them and actually made any changes, if she recognized she got them wrong, then she could erase them and she could see the questions going away. I also did this last night. I have a plastic cover, like a desk cover in my office, and we were writing on the desk with whiteboard markers. So this is something that, again, if they have a bunch of problems and they're overwhelmed and then they just wrote down how many problems they had to do and then just started erasing them, seeing that finish line get closer helps the actual initiation process. Then we got one more here, I believe. And this one is the feeling like it's going to take forever. Timers, but timers that count down, that show you the visualization of done. So sometimes we just do a digital timer. Something is better than nothing, but what you see here on your screen is a time timer with having the red kind of visually go away. There's a lot of even online timers that are equivalent to this, but what this does by seeing the red, the piece of the pie get smaller, it makes time more concrete and more actual. It feels like I'm getting closer to done. I'm getting closer to the break than just digital. Sometimes the flat digital clock or looking up at my time on my screen doesn't actually help my brain recognize and get the dopamine it needs to keep working. It really does need dopamine's the fuel of initiation. So I need to be able to see what that reward looks like. And sometimes when I just look at the clock and I just see another minute tick by and another minute tick by, it's going to do the actual opposite for me. So think about considering getting a visual timer to help your students see that finish line.
I'll also show you, because we have the opportunity to do this, if everyone might be able to see, we actually have these on every desk in the homework center. Everyone has their own visual timer and all the materials that they might need. So we are obviously a big believer in that here. Sometimes there are students that actually will set 2 visual timers, one for an actual kind of to chunk up a particular task and one until their next break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then all of a sudden, now that I have this replacement thought of just the awareness that I need a strategy, then now that chain changes. That action doesn't go to avoidance. It goes to, oh, I can get a snack. I can set a timer. And then the outcome is that I've earned something fun to do. Then the reward of going on YouTube or chatting with my friends feels much more satisfying. And I can tell you from many conversations with teenagers, college students and above, when they can notice that when they're avoiding and scrolling on TikTok, it's a lot less fun than when they've earned it after the work. But I can't just convince them. I can't just threaten or try to motivate in other ways. When they have the self-awareness of, oh, I need an initiation strategy, then that satisfaction does come.
And one of the things you might have inferred in terms of what we've been saying is that we don't like to keep secrets from kids. We don't want them to think that there is something wrong with them. We want them to see that really it's just an initiation strategy, because often what happens, and we hear this every day, is that students are smart and they can get by to a certain grade. So they can keep it all in their head that they have their history and their math and everything, and they can, rush through their work, or they can get all their work done quickly, even correctly. But then what happens is, you've all heard it, of course, it's medical school, but it happens around here probably a little earlier with the curriculum being as kind of aggressive as it is. And is that what you can't, you get to a place where you can't keep all that in your head anymore. That you have a history project and you have a science lab and you have a math test and you have an English paper. And not only can you not keep it all in your head, but you have to keep the chunks in your head that you need to do until that day that it's due. And so that then starts to question, the student starts to question themselves, oh, am I not smart anymore? Because they've conflated the smartness with the executive function. We're like, no, you just need an initiation strategy, an inhibition strategy, emotional control strategy, a plan or organization strategy. And that's really the suggestion advice that we give to parents, because we, again, when we're talking about being a detective, what is really that barrier, and what can be a great initiation strategy that we can give to them. So what you will hear from your students is a lot of objections, right? We took these literally from things parents tell us that their kids say every day and that we hear in our homework center, right? It's not for a grade. I'm so tired, I need a break. And what you're not going to hear is that they actually have a barrier. And why won't they tell you that? They might tell you that because they might be embarrassed, because maybe they don't know, because maybe they just really haven't even discovered, what might work for them, or they haven't even read the directions, so that they don't know how to start, because it's an emotional control thing. We host workshops here, and we're going to talk about one we're doing. We just recently, last weekend, did one for writing. And when we ask kids, what is your temperature level of anxiety from 1 to 5 when you get assigned a paper that's 4 to 6 pages and due in 2 weeks, since it's for middle schoolers, almost everybody's got a 5 that they hold up. And I think just seeing around the room that everybody else feels that way is very comforting to kids. But when they have that anxiety, they avoid. And so what we do in these workshops, and what we're asking, we're suggesting you do, is to help them feel that there's a way to initiate that's not as hard. And so that might be, as Lindsay said, taking out the highlighter, chunking it up, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But these are some of the things that are really critical for us to hear and to see as the barriers, versus that they're just lazy or unmotivated.
So the big takeaway that can bring you a lot of relief when you're trying to help your kid, when you notice, it's painfully aware when we see a kid having trouble initiating, right? You can see them avoiding an assignment. But the takeaway here is, don't convince and be curious, because if I respond to what they say, then I'm not responding to the actual need behind the behavior. So if I hear it's not for a grade, my instincts as a teacher could have been to convince them why they should consider this important, why it is important. And then all of a sudden we're in an argument that we never meant or intended to be in. But if I'm curious, I can actually help them reflect and build that self-awareness. So we're going to give you a little script here that doesn't have to be perfect, but if you follow the 4-step process of setting the boundary, validate, be curious, and then invite to on-ramp. So the setting the boundary just sounds like, and it can look like, okay, it's time to put your phone away. It's time to get your homework started. But I can validate, doesn't validate doesn't mean approval, but validate means understanding. I can understand that homework is not as interesting as their phone. And then that can make it hard to get started, that shift does make it hard to get started. So I could be curious, what sounds like a better strategy to you? Would it be setting the 30-minute timer? Or is it picking up picking background music. I know for me, I'm one that needs music more than a timer. That helps me. But what helps you? Be curious. Now I'm all of a sudden having a conversation about the strategy. I'm having a conversation about the solution, and I'm not trying to convince. So then that last part means that
Oh,
I can,
sorry.
no, that's okay. Just invite to that on ramp, right? Okay. So it sounds like you said that it's the 30-minute timer. So why don't you put your phone on Do Not Disturb and set that 30-minute timer? So now we're on ramped into the homework versus into the hour-long spiral conversation of convincing that I think we've all been trapped with before.
So now we're moving on to planning work. So Lindsay spent a lot of time talking about starting work, but the other big challenge that we see is planning work. And so, of course, where there's a barrier, I don't need to plan. Then what do we need to do? We need to we as our students, our typical students, is rely on working memory or reminders. And one quick thing to say at this part of the presentation is that if we think what kids need to do or typically do when they come home to check their portals and to figure out what their homework is they have that low executive function because it's after school or maybe after practice and maybe after a lot of things. And they tend to go to the preferred subjects, right? So I might remember that I have my math homework or I might not. And then I have to go into the portal and see what that is and figure out where it is. And I may do it. And then I need to remember to go back to the portal again. And yeah, right. So it goes on and on. And even if I do know everything and I tend to know it all, I may not be prioritizing it in a way that is helpful for me because I may be pushing that non-preferred topic into really late. And so it's just much more complex than we might think of. And so, and a lot more reliance on working memory to do planning for the work.
Mm-hmm.
So what we tend to say is that, what we want to say is that I need a planning strategy again. So if I don't need to plan, I need a planning strategy. So Lindsay, you want to talk about to do versus when do?
Yes, perfect. So I can't even tell you the amount of times a student might say, I know what I have to do. What they're really saying is they know a due date. They know that something is coming up. They know that there's something pending. And if I don't have a plan, that creates a lot of natural anxiety. So because your brain is constantly on a loop trying to recall that when due thing. So they might even try to suppress it. I'm sure you've seen some of your students try to avoid the awareness that something is coming up. I just don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about that science project. I don't want to talk about the history paper. I've got this. So back off. So what we can do is try to interrupt that thought pattern here and have them say, I need a plan. A list of due dates is not a plan. And that's what their portals give them. That's what Canvas gives them. That's what Schoology gives them. That's what they see. Google Classroom, great list maker. We can see a list of due dates, but it's not a plan. So what it might actually look like is I might have that science project due on the 25th. This, without planning strategies, without that planning executive function skill, is naturally going to create anxiety. What we can teach them, though, is how can I turn this, a due date, into to-dos? So to-do planning is knowing what I have to do. And this is something that they are not innately, naturally born able to do, no matter how smart they are. They need to be modeled. They need to see this modeled. They need the scaffolding to actually know how to take a due date and know what the chunks are. To us, it might feel natural or innate. They're not there yet. So then the second step is when I have that to-do of what I actually have to do, and then when is when it's got to submit. Now I got to do something with this information. So I got to tell my brain, I've got this, I got to offload it. So one of our favorite strategies is on the first day that they get any long-term paper project, they print out the directions and they highlight. You can see this big overwhelming science fair project. It looks like a lot of words. Teachers, we love to give all the information in the world, but let's give them the skill of finding what the actual to-dos are. And so all those highlights on the left became the to-dos on the right. So now what can I do with this information is I can turn it into a plan. And a traditional plan might look like on a calendar, like a 30-day calendar. The bigger, the better, the more visual, the better. If it's up on a wall, great. So we call this backwards planning because we start with the due date. And then the second backwards plan that I want them to consider is what conflicts might they have? what things that might they actually be looking forward to. This is the foresight, right? Like I know that I don't want to be shopping on Christmas Eve because I want to be sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in my hand. I have that forward thinking that I want to have this very dopamine producing night. So that can help me initiate and help me make a plan. So start with the stuff that's important to them. Their soccer schedule, they have a travel tournament, or they want to have a sleepover this week, or homecoming's coming up. Start by putting that stuff on the plan so that they can start to do that forward thinking and planning. So I know that when I was making plans for students who have finals, I can't believe Sidwell gets finals and midterms right after the new year, but we're making a plan over winter break. Yeah, Christmas Eve is probably not a night that you're studying for your midterms. That's okay, but let's plan around that.
And just to interject, we're often talking about being curious and questioning. We can give a lot more credence to our students, a lot more choice to our students. So rather than being like, okay, let's put everything on the calendar that we know is conflicts. What are you looking forward to
Mhm.
during this time? What's important to you to make sure that you're not doing homework during these times, right? And some kids will know, some kids won't know. I mean, it took my son till his 20s probably to figure out. I'm still helping him reminding him sometimes to make calendar invites for things. So, I think we understand where our kids' strengths and weaknesses are, but we still can be curious and ask them to participate as much as possible, or even lead the witness. Like, oh, don't you have that travel tournament coming up?
Mhm. And now I can take those chunks of that assignment and I can plan around those. And then you can see how that very overwhelming science direction sheet became an actual plan because we had a strategy here. The strategy was to do the backwards planning on a calendar. But we also want kids to know that the biggest skill that goes with planning is flexibility, because I think we've all made a beautiful plan and then life happens. So we also need to be flexible in how we're supporting our kids. Their traditional monthly planning might not work for your student, and that's okay too if we have flexibility. Another way that they can plan and store those chunks might be in Google Keep, which is what you see here on the screen. The barrier is this thought of like, oh, I'm going to remember what all these requirements are after I read it one time. Not so much. So in Google Keep, I can create a little checklist that's visual right in the slides where they're going to use it. So this is where I actually have to write my hypothesis. So why don't I have the checklist for the requirements for that hypothesis right there? So I don't have to switch tabs. This means that it supports their working memory, it supports their initiation, and their planning all in one tool by just using Google Keep. So it's, again, just a built-in feature of Google products. It's not something, an add-on or anything you need to add. But that could be a good strategy. And you can ask them, like, what feels better for you for your planning, the monthly calendar, or what if we tried Google Keep?
Yeah, so what you're seeing on the right in the green is the Google Keep list. That was this list right there of to-dos.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're seeing on the green. So that, as Lindsay said, it's right there when you need it, while they're in Google Slides.
Yeah. And then this, what you see on your screen is actually over my right shoulder as we speak right now. This is called a Kanban board. I have this up on my wall too. It's just sticky notes. It's sticky notes that live in columns that I start on the left side. And our brains do like that left-right progression, that transition from left to right. So to-dos are all my chunks. And then my doing column is my promise to myself that I'll do every day that I plan to work on the science project. I'm picking one sticky note that day. I'm picking a sticky note. And then a great question to ask students is, do you like seeing the done column grow, or do you like crumbling up the sticky notes and throwing away? I have a working theory that it's the same for people who like to check off a checklist or people who like to cross off a checklist. I think the cross off equivalent is the crumbling of the sticky note. And I think the check off is the seeing that done column grow. But that's the kind of conversation we want to be having with students, is like, what feels right to you? Then they can build that self-awareness of what works. So what this works for is for students who see that monthly calendar as a contract to themselves and to you, to be able to initiate and follow that plan to perfection. So if you see those students who might be resisting any plan whatsoever, even though you as their parents know full-heartedly it would make them feel better, it would help it would relieve that last minute, late night, stay up all night tears moments that you've seen. The reason they might be resistant to using a plan like that is because they don't trust their initiation and they really don't want to let themselves down and they don't want to let you down. So this might be a great strategy for those of you who have seen with your students resisting that traditional 2-week or monthly kind of plan. And then this is another one. This is just, we're going to shift into nightly work versus the long-term planning versus like the science project. This is for a student who had to finish up a science assignment that was overdue, and he had 9 questions in one section to do, 6 questions in another. And we wanted to make sure we were defining done. And so you see the kind of the novelty with the sticky notes, having the first, second, third. The third is green for a reason, to give some saliency that it's different, so we wouldn't forget to actually email the teacher. So that's defining done, because I'm sure you've seen from your students, and it's hard to see when you see them put in the effort of the work and then miss that last step of actually hitting the submit button. We naturally got to grow up in a time, I know I did, got to grow up in a time where the cue to turn in your homework was pass it to the person in front of you. And that was just a natural cue. I could never forget to turn in my homework because I was just aware. Now there's no awareness because I'm sitting at home alone and I'm clicking, and the satisfaction of filling in that last question on the Google Doc can be enough of a barrier to now I have to go back to Google Classroom. Now I have to go back and hit that submit button. It's not because they don't want to get credit for all that hard work they did. They just might need a strategy like this that is a different form of a checklist.
So why are we talking about bringing the finish line closer? I mean, there are definitely times where your kids have either said to you or you feel that there's avoidance because they think it's going to take forever. So what we're trying to do is, by chunking up work, it, again, as Lindsay was talking about, not only relieves working memory, but it also helps them feel that they can see the finish line. And we all know that if we have a project to do at work or some huge part.
Did I freeze, or did Debbie? If the chat can hear me, let me know. Debbie, oh no, it's Debbie. Okay, so I wasn't sure if it was me freezing, but I'll take over for her. Oh, it looks like, we both froze. Okay, but can everyone hear me now? Look, yes, okay. So as Debbie was saying that we're defining done so we could see the finish line. Yes, but no slides. Yeah, she'll be back in, in a second here. What we're going to shift over to in a second is just our nightly work and how to define done for our nightly work. And I could probably do a quick little share here just so we can see what we're talking about when it comes to the nightly work. And when I want to actually see what I have left to do, this can be another way to do it. I'm going to do my quick share here. Oh, okay. Sorry, I apologize for the tech issues. It won't let me share because it thinks she's still on. But when it comes time to do the homework with the kids and they might avoid planning, has anybody had students who just really wanted to rush and get started? And I don't need a plan, I just need to get started. So what we have is a homework plan that we can actually start by just listing out, brain dumping all the things that they know, and then going through the portals and previewing what the assignments actually look like. One of my favorite stories to talk about with previewing is when I was planning with a student, her and I both had this very natural reaction of panic because of the title of an assignment. Because the title of the assignment said, write a well-crafted essay. And I was like, oh no, it's due tomorrow. How did we miss this? It was for our AP Latin class. And the overwhelm hit us both at the same time. If she had been alone, I would have totally understood why her frontal lobe would have led her to avoid that assignment, because I couldn't see done. I couldn't imagine being able to write an AP Latin essay in a night. However, because we were together and we knew our routine was always to just open up and preview and get an estimate, when we opened it up and we read the directions, it said in 3 to 4 sentences, respond to the prompt. 3 to 4 sentences, that's not an essay. And not in my world is a 3 to 4 sentence. I saw the relief go over her face. And that happens 9 out of 10 times when we're working with a kid in the homework center is that when I am just assuming what I have to do and I don't actually um, look at the directions or preview the assignment, my frontal lobe is going to shut down, and then it's going to assume that it's going to take forever. So if you see a student who has ever had overwhelm, they do need to plan. It's not just if they know the due date, because many times parents will say, oh, they actually have it pretty well organized. They never miss assignments. They know what they have to do. If I ask them what they have to do, they can tell me. They can tell me the due dates. They still need a plan because it helps offload all of that working memory challenges and any emotional control. And it can walk them through actually the initiation part of the process. So I know, and I apologize for no slides, but I will keep going with just what you won't hear. If you have ever said to your kid about planning and they think it's going to take too long, right? Has anybody else, I know for myself too, sometimes I might try to skip the planning process because I think I just need to get started, or what's the point? Many younger students will say it's just easier to look online. The difference might be is what you're not hearing is I don't actually trust myself to follow the plan. Again, it can feel like a contract that they're signing with you. I don't believe in my ability to stick to this plan. You might try to hold me to it. I'll have this external accountability, and I'm going to be afraid that I'm going to get in trouble if I can't do it. So again, we want to follow that script that don't convince, but be curious. So how that might sound, you can set the boundary that we do want them to manage their own work, that you don't want to be the reminders. I know every call that we get has some sense of, I don't want to have to be the reminder to help them initiate. You actually don't have to remind them. I love that Anna's comment about, yeah, there's no interest in the time that it takes to planning. But with our students, when we see them having trouble, we try to help them initiate by reminding them what they have to do. It's not about what they have to do. It's that they need a plan for how to do it. So setting the boundary, we want to help you build that skill. On school nights, when you have homework, we're going to make a plan. We're going to make a plan for what's current or what's upcoming. You can validate. I know it feels like it's a waste of time. So, Anne, you can maybe try this with your husband. I know it feels like it's going to be frustrating, and I know it feels like it's going to be a waste of time. How long do you think it would take for us to make a plan? What's your estimate? Ask the question. Don't try to convince them, oh, it'll be so worth it. We'll feel better. It'll help us be more organized, not work last minute. We don't want to do any convincing. We want to ask a question. Be curious. How long do you estimate it might take to make a plan for tonight's homework? And what they might say is like, oh, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. And I go, okay, I'm going to set a timer for 15 minutes. I promise that if we are going over 15 minutes, you can just get started. Every time I do this with a student, it always takes less than that. But I'm not going to try to convince them out of their feelings. I'm going to show them a strategy. Okay, let's estimate. Can I give 15 minutes to planning? Now, what do I notice? I actually finished. It was much easier. I felt relief. I wasn't losing time going back to Google Classroom to find the document. One of my proudest work moments of my life happened last night with a student who pulled me over to their table and said, you're going to be so proud of me. Look at my plan. And he had planned to do a AP English assignment, and he had a AP Gov assignment. He showed me how he wrote it on his plan that night. Perfect. Great. Proud of you. He also showed me how he had those tabs open on his computer so that when he got to them, he would have less friction getting started. He just saved himself so much time later by making that plan. So that's what we want, is just that self-awareness, that they can see that it actually is a useful tool. And then that last part would just be, okay, do you want to make your plan on Post-its tonight? Or do you want to handwrite it? Or do you want to type it? Or should we stick it up on the wall? How do you want to make your plan tonight? That's where that flexibility comes into play. But what the Boundary might be is that the plan has to be offloaded from your head. Just got to take some kind of effort to go back and recheck. So I want to take it off of my frontal lobe, use a strategy, and then shift it to something external. So it can be paper or it can be digital. And then the last section that we wanted to just talk about is that when we see them not using these skills, we do have to just remind ourselves that they are developmental, that they are part of the natural process of growing up, and punishment doesn't build skills. Punishment, self-awareness does. Consequences can, but punishment doesn't. So if we have this reaction that's if we see missing work or trouble on test grades coming back and we want to say, I'm going to take away your phone, I'm going to punish you. I'm sure everybody's been the bad guy at one time in their life or in their student's story. You've been the worst person. My friend's parents don't do this. I'm not telling you that you don't have to have boundaries with your kid, but it's the punishment without the self-awareness that will never build the skills. So we're trying to say, okay, if I notice that there are missing assignments, let's sit down together and let's be a detective and be curious to say, what is the barrier here? Let's talk about what initiation skills or strategies we might need to use, or what planning strategies we might need to use. And Debbie's come back at the perfect time here. As we're wrapping up, we were just talking about the punishment doesn't build the skills.
So were you able to share the screen?
No, I wasn't because it still thought you were on. So
there we go. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the internet went out here, so I'm sorry about that. Did you go through this part?
Yes, but I'm sure people would appreciate just seeing the visual here. But this is kind of just what we were talking about. But I'll let Debbie because they just heard talk for a while.
Of course, you lose your internet right in the middle of the presentation. So we talked about don't convince, be curious. So we're showing our executive function skills of being flexible. So I am on my my hotspot. So did you go through this?
Yes, I did.
Part?
Catch up. Yeah, this is perfect.
Perfect. So as we said, what we really wanted to do is to try to understand that wherever there may be a barrier, we need a strategy. And that's probably the biggest message that we wanted to share today in terms of really helping to frame the way that we think about some of the challenges that our students are having, and also share with them that, again, it's by sharing that it's a specific type of strategy, executive function or study skill, planning, organization, time management, initiation, that it's really just something they can easily develop, or with work they can develop, instead of them being the problem. I'm sure Lindsay already shared that why punishment doesn't build self-awareness or skills. So we can punish them through things, but it does make it doesn't necessarily help them build those skills. And in summary, what we wanted, I guess the three big takeaways is that it does take time. So when you have a kid like Ethan, or whatever your student profile looks like, when you think about all of the time and practice that we require from our students to get great at tennis or soccer or anything else that we want them to be great at, it takes just that type of learning, coaching, and practice to get great executive function skills. The other thing that we like to share is that these are things that change over time. So just because we learned executive function skills in 4th and 5th grade, the requirements change. Just like if you're skiing and you move to those moguls, you need to have new skills. So you can't say I'm a great skier and then use the exact same skills that you used on the greens when you're on those steep hills with the moguls. And that's really where the strategies come in, because that's the foundations. So we really need strategies. Every time we've lost our keys for 5 times, we know that we need to put a hook up there. We don't really think to ourselves, oh, what's the barrier? The barrier is that, I'm my self-monitoring, when I go to put them down, I'm doing it without thinking, right? And so what we do know is that we just naturally go and create a strategy, but we have to be more deliberate with our students, because the goal isn't to get great at homework. The goal is to build that academic resilience and build their ability to do things that are hard. So that's really where the key messages that we want to leave you with. We also wanted to share that if you have a high school student, we do have that writing workshop coming up. These are free. That's on January 13th, from 1 to 2:30. And you can find that on our website, or you can look at the QR code here. And then we just had the middle schooler one. We'll do it again in the spring, so you can watch out for that. We also do, in addition to speaking at schools, we have a professional development of training for executive function to help educators and those who work in the field of education to improve executive function skills, and how can we help from the school perspective and the teacher perspective to recognize what behaviors are kind of a result of underdeveloped executive functions, and what we do to make it easier for all students. And finally, we have these webinars every single month. And so we have 3 speakers coming up. We're about to put out the information for Dr. Brenner. She actually, I know I see it's a little bit hard to read, but she has written a book called How to College. And she has a set of cards, different decks of cards that actually help you with conversations to get your students ready for college. And then Sharon Saline, who's a psychologist, who wrote what your ADHD child wishes you knew. And then finally, Dr. Kathleen Nadeau, who's just renowned in this field. She's written about 20 books. But one of the things that we haven't really talked about in the past is about career success and moving on for kids that have ADHD. So we wanted to talk about that. So go ahead, Lindsay, if you want to go ahead and respond to the questions. And if we have a last couple of minutes for questions, we're happy to answer any.
Yes, please do. I saw Jennifer's that caught my eye because I think it's a perfect example of an opportunity to be curious and not convinced, because you as her mom are very keenly aware that, yes, the question is when there's gaps in the knowledge, when you see your student, she's taking asynchronous classes, and you see her struggling with the content, and your instinct might be to convince them to go to the resources around them, ask their teachers to schedule times with your teachers. But when we're trying to convince, they will naturally take the opposite position, dig in their heels more. So what we want to do is be curious. Just be like, what do you notice? If you're seeing it, as you, if the parent, are aware because there's gaps in knowledge because of performance on exams or the end of the unit quizzes or whatever case it might be, you could just be like, what do you notice about those quizzes? Like, what's frustrating about them? What do you like about asynchronous classes? And she might respond like, I like that I can go at my own pace. I like that it's not as boring at school. Okay, well, tell me, where do you see the challenges? What are the frictions when it comes time to the quiz or the test time? Well, I just rush through it, or I make simple mistakes, or I make easy mistakes. Okay, well, what do you see as a path? What could be a strategy that we could try? Any ideas? If they don't have any, and it might be that because they need support, and that's why we offer coaching. And then there's even having somebody at school, like a counselor at school, might be the first step to help bridge to making the appointments with the teacher. But it's also could be very valid that they're assuming that if I do go to my teachers, it won't be helpful, or I'm battling my emotional control is I don't want to show that vulnerability, or I don't feel safe showing that vulnerability with my teachers yet. So, but what will be the first most helpful part for you as mom to support them is to just be curious and just see what their experience is like and find out more. Hopefully that helps.
So I know it's 10 o'clock and we had one other question from Dana. And Dana, if you want to email info@thestudypro.com, that might be easier for us to kind of go through specifically. And if you have other topics around executive function that you think it would be great to hold a webinar on, if there were things that you were hoping to hear but you didn't hear, we would love for you to email info@thestudypro.com, and I would put that I'll put that in here so that you know what it is that so we know what it is that we should be addressing. We hope that we gave you some practical strategies for how to think about what the barriers are for your students' work, and how to be more of a detective and how to be curious versus trying to convince, and maybe some strategies to get started and strategies to plan. And we hope to see you on some of these upcoming webinars. So thank you so much, everybody, for participating. We really appreciate it, and we love to see that everybody's here, and hope you have a great holiday season. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
See you later. Bye.